Think about the last time you met someone new. They told you their name, you nodded, smiled, maybe even repeated it back once, but a minute later, gone. You're replaying the conversation in your head, desperately searching for the name you should already know, and all you feel is that uncomfortable blank. Or maybe you sat through a meeting, absorbed a ton of important points, and by the time you opened your notes app, you couldn't recall half of them. We live in a world overflowing with information, and yet our memory often feels like a leaky bucket. What goes in quickly slips away. And the frustration is universal. How can something you literally just heard, just read, or just learned vanish so fast? It makes you feel like you're not paying enough attention, or worse, that something's wrong with your brain. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is how your brain naturally stores information? And what if there's a ridiculously simple way to hack that system so you remember almost anything you want? There's a powerful truth about memory that most people never get taught. Your brain doesn't keep information just because you saw it. It keeps information because it was forced to connect it to meaning. Without meaning, your brain treats new data like spam. It might hold it for a few seconds, but soon it hits delete. This is why you forget names and numbers so easily. A name on its own is just sound. A number without context is just noise. But when something feels meaningful, like the first time you held a car key, or the moment someone said something that changed how you saw yourself, you remember it for years. The trick then is not to fight your brain's design, but to cooperate with it. And surprisingly, there's a one-line technique that lets you do exactly that. Before I reveal the sentence, I want you to imagine something. Think about a time you learned something that really stuck with you. Maybe a line from a movie or a random fact that you can't seem to forget. Chances are it wasn't because you repeated it 10 times. It was because in that moment you unconsciously gave it context. You connected it to yourself, to your life, to your world. And that's the key. Memory is not about storage, it's about connection. Every time you want to remember something, your brain silently asks, does this matter? Does this link to what I already know? If the answer is no, the memory fades. If the answer is yes, it stays. So how do we trick the brain into saying yes? That's where the one-line trick comes in. The line is deceptively simple. This means that every time you hear something new, whether it's a name, a number, or a piece of knowledge, you follow it immediately with that phrase, and then finish the sentence. For example, her name is Anna. This means that I can imagine her as the character Anna from Frozen. Or, the code for the door is 4731. This means that it's like the year 4731 in the future, which feels like a sci-fi movie setting. Or, serotonin helps regulate mood. This means that when I take a walk in the sun, I'm literally raising my serotonin levels. With that tiny phrase, you've forced your brain to do what it naturally resists: build meaning. You've connected the fragile new input to something solid. You've made it relevant to you. And that act alone multiplies your chances of remembering by several times. Now, why does this work so well? Neuroscience shows that memory is not a filing cabinet where data gets stored neatly. It's more like a web, where every piece of information is tied to other pieces through associations. The stronger the associations, the easier it is to find the memory later. This means that is essentially a mental hook. It takes a floating piece of data and anchors it into the web of what you already know. You don't need repetition. You don't need flashcards. You just need one quick connection. And the beauty is that your brain doesn't care if the connection is logical, emotional, or even silly. As long as it's a link, it works. Think about how you still remember the weird mnemonics from school. They worked not because they were accurate, but because they forced a connection. That's exactly what this phrase does, only in a more flexible and universal way. Let's explore the framework around this trick, because it's not just about repeating a line, it's about shifting how you interact with information. I call it the 3 anchors of lasting memory. Anchor 1, meaning. Anchor 2, emotion. Anchor 3, imagination. Every time you use "this means that," you're activating at least one of these, and often all 3. You tie the new fact to a personal meaning, you inject a bit of emotional resonance, or you create a small imaginative link that sticks. For example, let's say you meet someone named Victor. Instead of just hearing the name and nodding, you think, Victor. This means that he's like a victor, a winner in a competition. You've instantly given the name a story. Or take a fact from a book. Water makes up about 60% of the human body. This means that when I drink a glass of water, I'm literally topping up the biggest ingredient of myself. Suddenly, the fact isn't abstract, it's alive. You might wonder, doesn't this take effort? The surprising answer is no. It actually saves you effort. Because without this connection, you'll spend minutes, hours, maybe days frustrated over forgetting and relearning. With it, you spend 1 extra second now and you save 100 later. And it's not about memorizing for school tests or exams. It's about life. Remembering names so you build stronger connections with people. Remembering details so you feel competent in conversations. Remembering ideas so you can actually use them. Think about the confidence you'd feel walking away from a meeting and being able to recall exactly what was said. Or greeting someone by name and seeing their face light up. That's not just memory, it's power, presence, and impact. To push this further, let's connect it to the science of emotions. Research shows that emotional tagging, tying a fact to even a small feeling, dramatically increases retention. When you say, "This means that," you often automatically attach an emotional color to the fact. Her name is Lily. This means that I'll picture a flower every time I see her. That's gentle, visual, emotional. The number is 17. This means that it's like my lucky number just reversed. That's personal, emotional. These micro-associations stick because the brain's memory systems are tightly linked with emotion centers. In fact, studies show that you're far more likely to remember events or details that carried even the slightest feeling compared to neutral ones. By deliberately creating that connection, you're essentially hacking the brain's survival system, which is designed to prioritize emotional relevance. But let's not stop there. The third anchor, imagination, is where the magic truly happens. Imagination isn't just for kids, it's the brain's most powerful tool for memory. When you say "this means that," you often end up creating a tiny mental picture. And pictures are far stickier than words. If someone's name is Brooke and you think, "This means that I can imagine a brook, a small river flowing through the forest," you've just made a vivid image. Next time you see them, the picture will pop up and the name comes with it. This is why memory champions, people who can memorize hundreds of numbers or cards, always rely on mental images. They know that raw data won't stick, but images will. You don't need to be a champion. You just need the trigger line that makes your brain naturally do the same thing. So let's recap where we are. Your memory isn't broken. It's simply following its default setting, discarding data that lacks meaning. The one-line trick, "this means that," flips that setting. It forces meaning, emotion, or imagination onto the data, anchoring it instantly. And once anchored, it's yours. This isn't about working harder. It's about working with your brain, not against it. Now, some of you might already be thinking, will this work on complex information, like learning a new skill or remembering an entire book? The answer is yes, but the secret is to break the big things into smaller chunks and anchor each one. For instance, if you're learning guitar and you discover that the G chord uses certain finger positions, you could say, "This means that my hand looks like I'm making a peace sign and adding one more finger." That silly image locks in the muscle memory. Or when reading a book, instead of trying to retain every page, you anchor the key ideas with one-line connections. This means that the author believes habits matter more than goals. One sentence, one anchor, and suddenly the idea isn't floating, it's fixed. What I want you to realize is that you've probably been taught to think memory is about grinding repetition. Flashcards, rereading, highlighting, rewriting. And while those methods can work, they're often exhausting and inefficient. What no one told you is that your brain doesn't need brute force, it needs relevance. When something feels relevant, it becomes sticky. When it's sticky, it doesn't slip away. And the fastest way to create relevance is to force a link in the moment of learning. That's why the line works so consistently. It's not magic, it's biology. You're simply giving your brain what it actually requires to keep information. And once you practice it a few times, it becomes automatic. You'll catch yourself hearing something new and instinctively saying in your mind, "This means that," and filling in the blank. It becomes second nature, and suddenly your world feels different. Not because the world changed, but because your brain finally started keeping more of it. Now let's take this framework and see how it transforms real-life situations. Imagine you're at a party, introduced to 5 new people in the span of 5 minutes. Usually, by the end of the introductions, your brain is foggy and all the names are a blur. But instead, you try the one-line trick with each. "This is Sarah. This means that I can picture Sarah from the old TV show I used to watch. This is Michael. This means that I'll imagine him holding a microphone because Michael sounds like Mike. This is Elena. This means that I can connect her name to the city of Elenium in the fantasy book I once read." The connections don't have to be perfect, they just have to be something your brain can grab. And when you circle back 10 minutes later, you'll find the names surface easily. Why? Because you didn't just store a sound, You tied it into your web of meaning. The same principle works for knowledge. Let's say you're studying a concept in psychology, the Zeigarnik effect, the idea that unfinished tasks stick in your mind more than finished ones. Instead of trying to memorize the definition, you pause and think, this means that the reason I can't stop thinking about the email I didn't send is literally explained by this effect. Suddenly it's not abstract. It's your life, and when you recall it later, the connection pulls it out. That 1-second habit of anchoring the fact into relevance makes the difference between forgetting and keeping. There's also a subtle psychological shift here. When you say this means that, you are not just remembering, you're processing. You're moving from passive intake to active transformation, and your brain is wired to reward that shift. Passive information is boring. Active information becomes experience. Think about how many times you've scrolled past hundreds of posts online and remembered almost none of them. But the one post you commented on or shared with someone stuck. That's because you made it meaningful by engaging. The one-line trick is like commenting on every new fact inside your head. You're telling your brain, this matters. Keep it. Now let's address a possible objection. What if the sentence I create feels forced or silly or irrelevant? That's actually the beauty of it. The brain doesn't care if the link is perfect. It just cares that a link exists. In fact, the sillier or more unusual the connection, the stronger it often becomes. Memory thrives on distinctiveness. If you meet someone named Greg and you think, this means that I'll picture him as a giant gray egg, that bizarre image is more likely to stick than a dry, logical one. This is why childhood rhymes, ridiculous mnemonics, and goofy word associations are remembered decades later. You're tapping into the brain's love for the unusual. So don't filter yourself. Lean into whatever connection pops up. The stranger, the better. Another key benefit of this trick is how it builds confidence. So many people secretly feel ashamed of their memory lapses. Forgetting names makes you seem careless. Forgetting information at work makes you feel unprepared. But when you start practicing this one-line habit, you begin to trust yourself again. You notice that you recall details more easily. You show up to conversations sharper. And confidence feeds memory even further because stress and self-doubt are memory's worst enemies. By using the trick, you reduce the anxiety that often blocks recall. It becomes a positive cycle. The more you anchor, the more you remember. The more confident you feel, the more open your mind becomes to learning and storing. Let's deepen the model with the idea of retrieval cues. Your brain is like a vast library, but you only find books if you know the right index card. This means that generates those index cards automatically. Each time you make a sentence, you're planting a retrieval cue in your mind. Later, when you need the information, the cue lights up. Think of it like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs back to the memory. Without the cue, the fact might still be in your brain, but it's buried. With the cue, you can find it in seconds. This is why people who practice active recall outperform those who only reread or highlight. They create cues. And with this one-line trick, you're doing the same instantly with no extra tools. To make this even more practical, I suggest you test it today in 3 areas: names, numbers, and knowledge. For names, the next person you meet, say the sentence in your head. For numbers, the next code, phone number, or figure you need, anchor it with a quirky image. For knowledge, the next fact you read, tie it to your life with, this means that. 3 tests, 3 anchors, and you'll see the difference almost immediately. Your recall will surprise you. It's like suddenly switching on a part of your brain you thought you'd lost. And here's something fascinating. Once you start practicing this, you'll notice a secondary effect. You don't just remember more, you start to think differently. Because when you're constantly asking, this means that, you're not only creating memory links, you're creating insight. You're training your brain to translate raw data into meaning. And meaning is the fuel of wisdom. Over time, you'll notice that you can connect ideas faster, see patterns others miss, and turn scattered information into clear understanding. What began as a memory hack becomes a thinking upgrade. You're literally rewiring how your mind processes the world. Now, I want to leave you with this thought. Your memory is not broken. You are not bad with names or terrible at remembering. Those are just labels you've picked up after years of using the wrong method. The truth is, your brain is a meaning-making machine, and when you give it meaning, it gives you memory. That one simple phrase, this means that, is the switch that turns forgetfulness into recall, and recall into mastery. It's not about adding more effort, it's about shifting how you engage. 1 second now saves hours later. One phrase now builds a skill for life. So the next time you learn something, don't just hear it. Don't just read it. Don't just nod. Stop for 1 second and say to yourself, "This means that," then finish the sentence. Anchor it, connect it, make it yours. Because the more you use this, the more you'll discover that you can, in fact, remember almost anything. And when you realize that, you don't just change your memory, you change your confidence, your learning, and the way you experience every day. Try it today, and you'll see for yourself how one tiny sentence can transform your entire mental world.